In 2024, Ducati reached the pinnacle of their success. The Mercedes GP24 was widely regarded as the finest MotoGP machine ever constructed, securing 16 victories from 20 races. They dominated everything: the Riders' Championship, the Constructors' Championship, and the Team's Championship. Then came 2025, and everything began to unravel. Ducati made a series of decisions that, with the benefit of hindsight, look like a catalog of catastrophic errors. They signed Marc Marquez to the factory team, sacrificing the carefully built internal balance. They developed the GP25, which proved inferior to its predecessor. They ignored warnings from their own riders, and they lost their way. Then came the moment when Ducati truly realized they had made a terrible mistake. That moment was not a single event. It was a series of bitter realizations that unfolded throughout the 2025 and into early 2026, when their bike ceased to be the fastest, when their riders lost confidence, and when their rivals began to take over. Let us trace the exact moments when Ducati came to understand their errors. Ducati's decision to recruit Marc Marquez for 2025 was, on the surface, a shrewd move. They were bringing in a rider with 11 world championships, the biggest marketing asset in the paddock, and undeniable talent. But beneath the surface, there were consequences they had failed to calculate. Francesco Bagnaia, a two-time world champion who had delivered Ducati their success, never truly understood why Ducati chose Marquez. According to reports, he even attempted to avoid direct confrontation with the Spanish rider. That decision, which Luigi Del Igna considered a strategic move to prevent others from winning, had shattered the team's internal equilibrium. Carlo Pernat, one of the paddock's most outspoken critics, put it bluntly: Ducati are paying a heavy price for Marquez's arrival. It has destabilized Bagnaia psychologically. He has changed. Pernat added, "Today Ducati have only one rider left, Marquez." Ducati's first moment of realization came when they understood that building an entire project around a single rider, no matter how exceptional, creates a dangerous dependency. When Marquez got injured, the team lost everything. If signing Marquez was a strategic error, then developing the GP25 was an even more severe technical failure. Bagnaia's 2025 season has been described as an industrial disaster. The Mercedes GP25 was supposed to be an evolution of the GP24. In reality, it became an unsolvable puzzle. Bagnaia described his experience vividly. "I didn't have the usual feeling on the bike. From the second test of the season, I started having difficulties. In the end, I just couldn't gel with what I was riding." The verdict for Bagnaia was brutal: weakened braking, vague corner entry, a total loss of feeling. Only Marc Marquez, with his supernatural talent, could overcome the bike's shortcomings. Matt Oxley, a senior motorsport journalist, even accused Ducati of lying about the cause of the problems. Ducati claimed the ride height device was to blame. Oxley said they must have been lying because the device could actually have been changed during the season. Bagnaia himself admitted his mistake. "My mistake was probably convincing myself that I had made a mess, that my potential with the GP24 was at its peak, so I took it for granted that I would do the same again." Instead, the bike had changed. Ducati's second moment of realization, when they understood that their new bike was worse than its predecessor, and nobody could fix it except one man who happened to be injured. This was perhaps the most embarrassing moment in Ducati's modern history. During the final 5 Grands Prix of the 2025 season, with Marc Marquez absent due to injury, Lenovo Ducati scored just 2 points on Sundays from a total of 125 available, 2 points from 5 races. This was a performance that even a satellite team would be ashamed of. No other team in 8 decades of MotoGP has ever performed so poorly. The Ducati that had dominated 2024 with 16 victories now couldn't score meaningful points without Marquez. This was naked evidence that their entire project depended on a single rider. Motorsport magazine wrote sharply, "Ducati chose the right time to sign Marquez, because for once they needed a genius who could ride an unruly bike to victory." But Marquez also chose the right time to join Ducati, because for the first time in nearly a decade, Ducati didn't have the best bike on the grid. This was a painful irony. Ducati had recruited the world's best rider precisely at the moment when their bike had become the worst. Ducati's third moment of realization, when they understood that without Marquez, they were nothing. One of the most shameful aspects of Ducati's crisis was how long they ignored Bagnaia's warnings. Bagnaia's coach Manuel Poggiali had warned Ducati about the bike's problems from the start of the season. Those warnings were ignored for 16 races. Only when Casey Stoner, a Ducati legend, confirmed the same problems at Misano did the team start to listen. Imagine, your two-time world champion tells you something is wrong with the bike. You ignore him. Then a retired rider says the same thing, and only then do you take action. This was a spectacular failure of communication. Bagnaia himself expressed his frustration. The DNA of this bike has changed slightly and unfortunately I can't adapt. He even described the 2025 season as a disaster in every way. Meanwhile, Marquez, who had joined the same team, adapted quickly. Bagnaia acknowledged, Marc is ultimately a very intelligent person. He adapted immediately. But that admission only added to the wound. Bagnaia, the rider who had delivered 2 titles to Ducati, now had to watch his teammate do what he could not. Ducati's fourth moment of realization, when they understood they had destroyed their own champion's confidence by ignoring him for too long. Entering 2026, Ducati hoped for improvement. They designed the GP26 as a hybrid, combining the exceptional GPP24 with lessons from 2025. The result? The GP26 remained an enigma. Alex Criville, the Spanish 500 cubic centimeters legend, described Ducati's confusion. Ducati no longer know which is the best version of their bike. The GP24 remains the benchmark. Many riders, including those from satellite teams, still prefer it, but the GP24 is no longer in production and no longer receives development. The GP25 was a failure. Too nervous, too difficult to tame. The GP26 shows progress at certain circuits, but weaknesses in other areas. At the start of the 2026 season, Ducati failed to achieve a single podium in the first 3 rounds. This was the first time in 88 consecutive Grands Prix that Ducati had no bike on the podium. Aprilia, who had previously been in Ducati's shadow, now dominated. Marco Bezzecchi led every lap in Thailand, Brazil, and the United States. Davide Tardozzi, Ducati's team manager, admitted, "This year will be tough." Ducati riders complained about wheelie problems at the start and handling issues on corner entry. Alex Marquez even confessed he was just trying to survive on the GP26. Ducati's fifth moment of realization, when they understood they no longer knew which bike was best and their rivals had taken over. One of Ducati's most controversial decisions was refusing to promote Jorge Martin to the factory team for 2025. Despite his having won the 2024 World Championship, Martin, who had spent 4 years at the satellite Pramac team, instead saw his seat given to Marc Marquez. Valentino Rossi himself fiercely criticized this decision, saying the consequences would be enormous. Martin believes Ducati now regrets that decision, and he is probably right. By moving to Aprilia, Martin has become a serious threat to Ducati. He led the 2026 standings while Ducati struggled. This was a painful irony. Ducati rejected the rider they had nurtured, and that rider has now become their biggest enemy. Ducati's sixth moment of realization, when they understood they had let their most valuable asset go, and that asset was now destroying them. Beneath all the technical and strategic errors, there was one fundamental mistake that made everything worse: a failure of communication. Motorsport magazine published a sharp analysis of how Ducati handled the 2025 crisis. Ducati failed to give anyone, us journalists and you fans, any indication of what was happening, and then they further obscured the issue with ambiguous and contradictory statements. They broke two of the biggest rules of PR and media relations. 1. Never create an information vacuum. Because nature abhors a vacuum, an information vacuum will quickly be filled with something, and that something is nonsense. 2. Only lie when you absolutely must. Because if you tell the truth 9 times out of 10, people will believe you when you finally do lie. Ducati did the opposite. They stayed silent. They allowed speculation and conspiracy theories to fill the void. The result? Trust was shattered. Fans were confused. Journalists were frustrated. Riders lost their way. Ducati's seventh moment of realization, when they understood that silence is not golden, it is a time bomb that explodes in your face. If there was one moment that marked Ducati's total defeat, it was when Bagnaia decided to leave. Bagnaia's contract with Aprilia began to circulate. This was not an escape, observers said. It was a reconstruction. a way to regain undisputed leadership elsewhere. Bagnaia, the rider who had won 2 titles for Ducati, the rider who was supposed to be the face of their future, was now going to their biggest rival. Ducati would enter 2027 without an Italian rider in the factory team for the first time in 17 years. This was the most painful defeat, not because they lost races, but because they had lost the very soul of their team. Ducati's 9th moment of realization, when they understood they had lost the best rider they had ever nurtured, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. So what can we learn from Ducati's crisis? First, greatness is not eternal. Ducati dominated 2024, but within a year they had fallen from the summit. Second, recruiting the best talent is not enough. You must build a team, not just rely on one individual. Third, listen to your riders. Bagnaia said something was wrong from the start. Ducati ignored him for 16 races. Fourth, communication is everything. Silence is not a strategy, it is a defeat. And finally, great mistakes do not happen in an instant. They happen gradually. One poor decision, one act of neglect, one small untruth, until suddenly you realize you have made a monumental error. Ducati realized it, but the question remains, was it already too late? See you in the next video.